My name is Joanne, and at 29 years old, I stood in that lawyer's office watching my family celebrate their millions while I held a single plane ticket to Monaco. They laughed at my pathetic inheritance, but I noticed something they didn't. A handwritten note on the envelope saying, "Everything begins where the sun meets the casino at midnight." The family lawyer kept glancing at me nervously, and when I realized the ticket was first class dated for tomorrow and non-refundable, I knew grandfather had planned something bigger. Before we dive into this incredible journey, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever felt overlooked by family or wondered if there's more to an inheritance than meets the eye, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how a simple plane ticket changed everything. Trust me, what seemed like the worst day of my life became the beginning of sweet revenge. Let's uncover the truth together. 3 days before the funeral, I sat beside my grandfather's hospital bed like I had every single day for the past month. His breathing was shallow, and the monitors beeped steadily as I held his weathered hand. I was the only family member who visited daily, bringing his favorite butterscotch candies and reading him stories from his beloved mystery novels. That afternoon, everything changed when Aunt Catherine burst through the door with a man in an expensive suit. "Joanne, you need to leave," Aunt Catherine announced, not even glancing at her dying father. The man with her shuffled papers importantly, and I recognized him as a lawyer from downtown. My aunt's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on her designer purse as she waited for me to move. "Dad's resting and we have important business to discuss," she added, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I protested that grandfather was heavily medicated and in no state to handle business matters, but Uncle Robert appeared in the doorway like he'd been waiting outside. His massive frame blocked any exit as he stepped toward me. "You heard, Catherine," he growled, grabbing my arm roughly. "Family business doesn't concern you." He physically pushed me out of the room while I stumbled backward, shocked at the aggression. Through the closing door, I glimpsed the lawyer pulling out documents and placing them in front of my barely conscious grandfather. "This is elder abuse," I shouted, but Cousin Michelle appeared from nowhere, and I realized with growing horror that she was the lawyer. My own cousin, who'd eaten at our family dinners and borrowed money for law school from grandfather, was now part of whatever this was. "If you harass my client again, I'll file a restraining order," Michelle said coldly, adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Morrison has every right to adjust his estate planning without interference from disgruntled family members." The legal threat in her voice was clear, and hospital security was already walking toward us. As they forced me to leave, I heard Uncle Robert's voice through the door saying something about removing her from the will entirely. My hands shook as I pressed the elevator button, knowing I was witnessing something terrible but feeling powerless to stop it. I tried calling Adult Protective Services from the hospital parking lot, but they said they'd need evidence of abuse, and my word against 3 family members wasn't enough. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital to find security waiting for me. Aunt Catherine stood behind them with crocodile tears streaming down her face, claiming I'd stolen grandfather's vintage Rolex watch from his bedside table. The watch was worth $50,000 and had been promised to Uncle Robert for decades. Security informed me that the footage from grandfather's room had mysteriously corrupted overnight, leaving no evidence to defend myself. "Check her car," Aunt Catherine insisted, clutching a tissue dramatically. "She probably hasn't had time to sell it yet." Despite my protests, security escorted me to the parking garage where police were already waiting. My heart sank as an officer pulled the missing watch from under my driver's seat, exactly where I knew I hadn't put it. The interrogation at the police station lasted hours. They questioned why I visited grandfather so often, implying I was after his money. They asked about my student loans, my credit card debt, trying to paint a picture of desperation. All the while, I kept thinking about grandfather alone in that hospital room with vultures circling his bed. My salvation came from an unexpected source. Nancy, the night nurse who'd cared for grandfather, arrived at the station and insisted on speaking to the detective. She'd seen Aunt Catherine enter the parking garage earlier that morning, despite Catherine claiming she'd just arrived when the theft was discovered. The security footage from the garage, unlike the conveniently corrupted room footage, clearly showed Catherine near my car. The charges were dropped, but by the time I made it back to the hospital, it was too late. Grandfather had passed away while I was being interrogated about a crime I didn't commit. Nancy pulled me aside in the hallway, her eyes filled with sympathy. "He was asking for you," she said softly. His last words were strange, though. He kept saying, "Tell Joanne, Monaco. Trust no one but the banker." I thought maybe the medication was making him confused, but he seemed so insistent. I collapsed in the hospital corridor sobbing, not just for the grandfather I'd lost, but for the family I'd thought I had. They'd orchestrated his final moments to ensure I wasn't there, and stolen my chance to say goodbye. As Nancy helped me to a chair, I noticed Aunt Catherine walking out of Grandfather's room, tucking papers into her purse with a satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. The funeral service at Riverside Memorial Chapel was packed with Grandfather's friends, business associates, and extended family members I hadn't seen in years. I sat in the second row, denied a place with immediate family by Aunt Catherine, who claimed the first row was for those who truly loved him. The irony burned as I watched my relatives dab at dry eyes while checking their phones for stock prices. Uncle Robert took the podium for the eulogy, his voice booming with false grief as he painted a picture I didn't recognize. According to him, I was the ungrateful granddaughter who'd abandoned the family, only showing up when Grandfather got sick. He spoke of how Grandfather had been disappointed in my life, choices how I'd refused family gatherings and holiday celebrations. Each lie was carefully crafted, mixing enough truth to be believable. Yes, I'd missed some gatherings, but only because I was working double shifts to pay for college without asking Grandfather for money like everyone else had. The real knife came when Cousin Brad stood up with a laptop projecting photos onto the funeral home's screen. There I was, supposedly partying at a nightclub while Grandfather lay dying. The photos were expertly edited, my face from old college photos superimposed onto scenes of debauchery. Dates and timestamps showed me allegedly living it up during the exact hours I'd been sleeping in hospital waiting rooms. Despite everything, Aunt Catherine announced to the assembled mourners, "I forgive Joanne for trying to steal from a dying man. Dad would want us to show mercy, even to those who showed him none." The crowd murmured sympathetically, and I felt hundreds of eyes boring into me with judgment. My protest died in my throat as Uncle Robert's hand clamped down on my shoulder, his whispered threat clear. "Make a scene and we'll have you arrested again." After the service, we gathered in the lawyer's office for the will reading. The wood-paneled room smelled of old leather and betrayal as Michelle's law partner, Mr. Crawford, adjusted his glasses and began reading. I noticed Michelle herself sat with the family rather than at the lawyer's table, already counting her inheritance. "To my son, Robert," Crawford read, "I leave $4 million and my collection of vintage automobiles." Uncle Robert's grin was savage as he glanced at me. "To my daughter, Catherine, $5 million and my properties in Vermont, Florida, and California." Aunt Catherine pretended to wipe away a tear while calculating property values on her phone. The list continued like a parade of greed. Brother James, who hadn't visited Grandfather once during his illness, received $3 million and Grandfather's successful importing business. Cousin Michelle got $2 million for years of dedicated legal service, though we all knew she'd only been Grandfather's lawyer for 6 months. Cousin Brad received $1.5 million plus Grandfather's yacht, the same yacht he'd begged to borrow every summer and been refused. "And finally," Crawford said, pausing dramatically, "to my granddaughter Joanne, I leave 1 plane ticket to Monaco and whatever she finds there." The room erupted in laughter. Aunt Catherine actually applauded while Uncle Robert muttered something about more than she deserves. Crawford handed me a single envelope while my family members signed papers for their millions. Inside was indeed a first-class ticket to Monaco departing tomorrow. The humiliation burned, but something in Crawford's expression as he handed it over seemed almost apologetic, as if he knew more than he was saying. The cruelty continued outside the lawyer's office. Brother James, flush with his new fortune, informed me that I had 24 hours to vacate Grandfather's guest house where I'd been living while caring for him. "I'm taking possession of the entire property immediately," he said, jingling a new set of keys. Your stuff will be on the lawn by morning. True to his word, when I arrived at grandfather's estate that evening, my belongings were already in garbage bags on the front lawn. The locks had been changed, and security guards hired by James prevented me from even saying goodbye to the roses I'd planted with grandfather last spring. Inside the main house, I could see my family celebrating with champagne, toasting their good fortune, while my life lay in trash bags at their feet. That's when Maria, grandfather's housekeeper of 30 years, appeared from the shadows of the garden shed. Her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was determined as she pressed something cold and metal into my hand. It was a safety deposit box key with a Monaco address engraved on it. "Your grandfather knew what they were doing," she whispered in her accented English. "He told me if anything happened to make sure you got this. They've been planning this for years, Joanne. Every family dinner, every holiday, they would meet after you left and discuss how to get their hands on his money." She glanced nervously at the house before continuing. "He wasn't confused at the end. Everything he did was deliberate. Go to Monaco, child. Find out what he left for you there." Before I could ask more questions, she hurried away, but not before adding, "Trust no one from this family. No one." I stood there in the darkness holding a plane ticket and a key while my entire family celebrated inside the house I could no longer enter. My clothes were in garbage bags, my car keys had been confiscated as it was registered to the estate, and I had less than $800 in my bank account. But something in Maria's urgency and that strange note on the envelope made me realize this wasn't over. Grandfather had one last move in whatever game this was, and I was the only piece left on his side of the board. The next morning, I dragged my garbage bags to a taxi using nearly $100 just to get to the airport. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why someone flying first class was hauling trash bags as luggage. At check-in, the agent's eyes widened when she scanned my ticket. "Ms. Morrison, you've been upgraded to our private jet service," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "This ticket, I've never seen coding like this. Please follow me to our exclusive lounge." As she led me through corridors I didn't know existed in the airport, I noticed a man in a dark suit following us. When I turned to look at him directly, he suddenly became very interested in his phone. The private lounge was a different world entirely. While I sat awkwardly with my garbage bags amid elegant travelers, a flight attendant approached with an envelope. "This was left with specific instructions to give it to you once you were safely in the lounge," she explained. "I'm told you're not to open it until you land in Monaco." Throughout the flight, I clutched that envelope while trying to make sense of everything. The luxury of the private cabin felt surreal after being thrown out like garbage just hours ago. The man from the airport was nowhere to be seen, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When we finally touched down in Monaco, my hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address for Banque Privée de Monaco, an account number, and an old photograph. The black and white image showed my grandfather as a young man, perhaps 30 years old, standing next to a beautiful woman I'd never seen before. They were on what looked like a yacht, the Monaco harbor visible in the background. On the back in grandfather's shaky handwriting were the words, "Some secrets are worth keeping until the right moment." The taxi driver who approached me at the airport seemed to know exactly who I was before I spoke. "Mademoiselle Morrison," he asked in accented English. "I am to take you to the Old Town We." When I started to give him the bank's address, he waved his hand dismissively. "I know where you need to go. Your grandfather, he made arrangements." The drive through Monaco was breathtaking, but my mind was racing too fast to appreciate the beauty. The bank was tucked away on a quiet street, its discreet brass plaque the only indication of what lay behind the ornate wooden doors. Inside, I was immediately greeted by a distinguished man in his 60s who introduced himself as Sebastian Beaumont. "We've been expecting you, Ms. Morrison," he said, leading me to a private office that overlooked the harbor. "Your grandfather and I have been business partners for 40 years, though your family never knew of my existence. Please sit. What I'm about to show you will explain everything." He placed a leather portfolio in front of me and opened it carefully. The first document was an account statement that made me gasp. 50 million euros. I had to read the number 3 times to believe it was real. But it was the letter underneath that truly took my breath away. My dearest Joanne. It began in grandfather's handwriting. If you're reading this, then my fears have come true, and your family has shown their true colors. By now, you've experienced their cruelty firsthand, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. But know that everything that has happened was anticipated and planned for. 3 years ago, I discovered that Catherine and Robert were slowly poisoning me. Nothing fatal, just enough to make me seem senile and confused. Michelle was helping them forge documents, creating a paper trail of incompetence that would allow them to take control of my estate. James, though not initially involved, was bought with promises of the business. Brad was their spy, reporting on my every movement. The will they're celebrating is fake. Michelle drafted it, but it has no legal standing because I was never competent to sign it. The real will? My true last testament is here in Monaco, along with evidence of everything they've done. The embezzlement, the elder abuse, the poisoning, it's all documented. Your grandfather wasn't a fool, my dear. I was simply buying time and gathering evidence. But why put you through this pain? Because I needed them to show themselves for what they are. I needed witnesses to see how they treated the only family member who truly loved me. Every cruel action, every theft, every lie has been documented by people you don't even know were watching. Maria was one, but there were others. The fortune in Monaco is yours, built through investments they never knew existed. But more than money, I'm leaving you the power to expose them and reclaim not just wealth, but justice. Sebastian will guide you through everything. Trust him as you trusted me. All my love, grandfather. P.S. The woman in the photograph is someone you need to meet. Sebastian knows where to find her. I sat in stunned silence as Sebastian poured me a glass of water. The room spun slightly as I tried to process the magnitude of what I'd just learned. My family hadn't just betrayed me. They'd been poisoning grandfather for years. The man I'd spent months caring for had been playing a longer game than any of us imagined. There's more, Sebastian said gently. Your grandfather owned several businesses here in Monaco that your family knows nothing about. Hotels, a small casino, interests, and shipping companies. He built an empire in Europe while maintaining his American facade. It's all yours now, but we must move carefully. Your family will come for you once they realize the truth. As if summoned by his words, my phone began buzzing frantically. 30 missed calls from James, text messages from Aunt Catherine demanding to know where I was. The last message was from Michelle. We know you left the country. You can't run from legal obligations. Return immediately or face consequences. How did they find out so quickly, or I asked Sebastian. Your brother has connections in Homeland Security. He tracked your passport. Sebastian's expression darkened. This is why your grandfather wanted you to leave immediately. They're already mobilizing against you. I received word an hour ago that your aunt has contacted the Monaco authorities claiming you stole money from the estate. Your Uncle Robert is on a flight here as we speak with documents claiming you're mentally unstable and need to be institutionalized. The weight of their coordinated attack was staggering. Even from beyond the grave, grandfather had predicted their every move, but that didn't make facing it any easier. Sebastian showed me more documents, forged psychiatric evaluations Michelle had prepared months ago, false testimony from bribed doctors, even a commitment order with a judge's signature obtained through Robert's connections. What do I do? I asked, feeling the walls closing in despite my newfound wealth. For now, we secure the evidence and prepare for war, Sebastian replied. Your grandfather didn't just leave you money, Miss Morrison. He left you the means to destroy them. But first, there's someone you need to meet. The woman in that photograph has been waiting 40 years for this moment. As we left the bank through a private exit, I noticed the man from the airport standing across the street talking rapidly into his phone. Sebastian noticed too, and quickly ushered me into a waiting car. Your family has hired private investigators, he explained. They're faster than we anticipated. We need to move up our timeline. The car sped through Monaco's winding streets, while I clutched the portfolio containing my grandfather's evidence. In just 24 hours, I'd gone from grieving granddaughter to target in a war I was only beginning to understand. But for the first time since that humiliating will reading, I felt something other than despair. I felt the stirring of hope tinged with a desire for justice that would have made grandfather proud. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Emma, my best friend since college. "Joanne, where are you? Your family is worried sick. They said you stole money and ran. Please call me back. I'm here for you." Even across an ocean I could feel the net tightening, but now I had weapons of my own. The game grandfather had started was far from over. Within 48 hours of my arrival in Monaco, my family launched a coordinated assault on my reputation that would have been impressive if it wasn't so vicious. I woke up to find my social media accounts flooded with tagged posts from newly created profiles all sharing the same fabricated story: Joanne Morrison, the ungrateful granddaughter who'd been having an affair with her grandfather's doctor to manipulate him into changing his will. The posts included expertly photoshopped images showing me in compromising positions with Dr. Harrison, the elderly physician who'd cared for grandfather. They'd taken innocent photos from the hospital where I'd hugged him after hearing good news about grandfather's condition and transformed them into something sordid. Comments poured in from accounts claiming to be nurses and hospital staff, all confirming the inappropriate relationship they'd witnessed. My phone rang constantly as reporters tried to reach me for comment. Someone had leaked the story to local news stations back home, painting me as a gold digger who'd preyed on a dying man's physician to gain inside information about his condition. The narrative was so well crafted that even I almost believed it for a moment. Then came the professional destruction. An email from my employer informed me that they'd received disturbing information about my character and were terminating my position effective immediately. When I tried to call HR to explain, they wouldn't take my calls. Aunt Catherine had called them personally, I later learned, claiming I was under investigation for elder abuse and theft. But the deepest cut came that afternoon when David, my fiancé of 3 years, sent me a text that shattered my heart. "I can't believe you've been lying to me this whole time. Emma showed me everything, the photos, the evidence of your affair. I'm done. I've already moved your things out of the apartment. Don't contact me again. Emma." My best friend since freshman year. The person I'd confided in just yesterday about the Monaco discovery. I called her immediately, my hands shaking as I waited for her to answer. When she did, her voice was cold and distant. "How could you, Joanne?" She started before I could speak. "Your poor family is devastated. Brad told me everything about how you manipulated your grandfather, how you've been planning this for years." "Brad, Almain." I interrupted, confusion mixing with growing horror. "Since when do you talk to my cousin Brad?" There was a pause, then a defiant response. "We've been dating for 6 months. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd try to turn me against him like you've turned against your entire family. He's been so worried about you, Joanne. We all are. Just come home and face what you've done." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Every phone conversation we'd had, every text about my plans, every moment of vulnerability I'd shared, she'd been reporting back to Brad. My family had planted a spy in my life 6 months ago, knowing grandfather was declining, preparing for this moment. "You recorded our calls, didn't you?" I asked, suddenly understanding why Emma had been so eager to talk on the phone rather than text recently. "Brad's lawyer said it was important to document your mental state," she admitted without shame. "For your own good, Joanne. You need help." I hung up and threw my phone across the hotel room, watching it shatter against the wall. Sebastian had moved me to a secure location, but I'd never felt more exposed. Everyone I'd trusted had been compromised. Every relationship had been a lie. The legal assault began the next day. I was served papers at breakfast by a Monaco process server. Aunt Catherine had filed criminal charges claiming I'd forged grandfather's signature on documents transferring money to Swiss accounts. The accusations were detailed and specific, citing exact amounts and dates that coincided with my hospital visits. Of course, these were the same dates they'd been poisoning him and forcing him to sign their documents, but twisted to make me the villain. Cousin Michelle had crafted a masterpiece of legal aggression. Beyond the criminal charges, there were civil suits claiming conversion of assets, breach of fiduciary duty, and even intentional infliction of emotional distress on the family. She'd forum shopped to find judges in 3 different jurisdictions who would hear the cases, ensuring I'd be fighting legal battles on multiple fronts. "This is just the beginning," Sebastian warned as we reviewed the papers in his office. "They're trying to freeze the Monaco accounts by claiming the money was obtained illegally. If any judge believes their story even temporarily, you could lose access to the funds you need to fight back." As if to underscore the point, my phone, now replaced, buzzed with a notification from my bank back home. My personal accounts had been frozen due to suspicious activity, reported by concerned family members. The $800 I'd had to my name was now inaccessible. If not for Sebastian arranging a credit line against the Monaco assets, I'd have been completely penniless. The investigators my family hired were relentless. They followed me everywhere, taking photos that would later be spun into evidence of erratic behavior. When I stopped at a pharmacy for aspirin, the photos would show me buying drugs. When I met with lawyers, I was conspiring with criminals. Every normal action was documented and twisted. Then came the witnesses. Aunt Catherine had been busy buying testimonies from anyone willing to sell them. A waiter at a restaurant grandfather and I had frequented submitted an affidavit claiming he'd overheard me discussing how to get the old man's money. A bank teller swore she'd seen me forge grandfather's signature. Even the florist who'd delivered flowers to grandfather's room claimed I'd made suspicious comments about inheritance. The darkest moment came when Sebastian called me to his office with grim news. "Your cousin Michelle isn't just orchestrating this for family loyalty," he revealed, showing me financial records grandfather had hidden. "She's been embezzling from your grandfather's companies for over a decade. Almost $15 million siphoned off through shell companies and fake invoices. If you expose your family's crimes, her embezzlement will be discovered. She's not just fighting for money, she's fighting to stay out of prison." The revelation recontextualized everything. Michelle wasn't just the family lawyer. She was the architect of their entire scheme. She'd noticed grandfather's discovery of her theft and convinced the others that he was going senile needed to be controlled. The poisoning, the forged documents, all of it had been to cover her crimes while enriching the others enough to ensure their cooperation. "She's brilliant," I admitted grudgingly, looking at the complex web of financial crimes she'd woven. "Evil but brilliant." "Your grandfather thought so too," Sebastian replied. "That's why he spent 3 years gathering evidence against her. But she knows that evidence exists now, which makes her desperate and dangerous." That night, alone in my hotel room with security guards posted outside, I finally broke down. The weight of losing everything crashed over me. My family, my friends, my fiancé, my job, my reputation, all gone in less than a week. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, wondering if grandfather had really done me a favor by leaving me this cursed inheritance. But as dawn broke over Monaco's harbor, something shifted inside me. I thought about grandfather's letter about how he'd endured 3 years of poisoning while gathering evidence. He'd suffered in silence to protect me and prepare for this moment. I couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. I called Sebastian as soon as his office opened. "No more defense," I said firmly. "It's time to show them what grandfather really left me." "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we begin this counteroffensive, there's no going back. They'll escalate beyond anything you've seen so far." I thought about Emma's betrayal, David's abandonment, my family's cruelty. There was already no going back. They'd destroyed the life I'd known, but in doing so, they'd freed me from any obligation to protect them. "I'm certain," I replied. "Let's see how they like being hunted for a change." Sebastian's smile through the phone was audible. "Your grandfather would be proud. Isabella has been waiting for your call. It's time you learned the full truth about your family's history and why your grandfather chose you for this fight." As I prepared to meet the mysterious woman from the photograph, I realized that my darkest hour was ending. The family thought they'd broken me, but they'd only revealed their true nature. Now it was my turn to reveal mine, and I was my grandfather's heir in more than just money. I was his heir in patience, planning, and the kind of cold justice that comes from being pushed too far. The meeting with Isabella changed everything. Sebastian drove me to a villa overlooking the Mediterranean where a dignified woman in her 90s waited in a sun-drenched garden. Despite her age, her eyes were sharp and clear as she studied me with an intensity that felt familiar. When she spoke, her accent carried traces of old Monaco nobility. "You have his spirit," she said simply. "Not Catherine or Robert, though they are my blood. You have Charles's courage." It took me a moment to realize she meant grandfather. No one had called him Charles in my lifetime. He'd always been Charlie to everyone. The story she told rewrote everything I thought I knew about my family. Isabella had been grandfather's first love, and they'd had 2 children together before his family forced him to return to America for an arranged marriage that would save their failing business. Catherine and Robert were Isabella's children raised in Monaco while grandfather built his American empire with his second wife, the woman I'd known as grandmother. "He never forgot us," Isabella explained, showing me letters grandfather had written over the decades. "When your grandmother died, he wanted to bring us to America, but Catherine and Robert were adults by then. They came, but they resented him for the years of absence. They wanted money, not a father. So they're not even—" I trailed off, mind-reeling. "They're your half-aunt and uncle, not full siblings to your mother. Your mother was from his American marriage, the only child who truly loved him without condition. When she died, leaving you orphaned at 5, Charles saw a chance to do better. But Catherine and Robert saw you as competition for their rightful inheritance." The family dynamic suddenly made terrible sense. The coldness, the resentment, the orchestrated cruelty, it all stemmed from decades-old abandonment and greed. But Isabella wasn't finished with her revelations. "I helped Charles build his Monaco empire," she continued. "Every property, every investment, I was his silent partner. Your family never knew because they never cared to truly know him. But I've been waiting, keeping records, maintaining proof. I have 40 years of documentation showing their crimes, their greed, their betrayal." She led me to a study where filing cabinets lined the walls. "Security footage from Charles's hospital room," she said, opening one drawer. "He installed cameras they never found. The poisoning, the forced signatures, the threats against you, it's all here." I watched in horrified fascination as she played video after video. There was Aunt Catherine slipping something into grandfather's water pitcher. Uncle Robert holding grandfather's hand to sign documents while he was unconscious. Michelle talking candidly about her embezzlement, believing grandfather was too sedated to understand. They'd been so arrogant, so certain of their victory, they'd been careless. "There's more," Isabella said, pulling out financial records. "Michelle has been stealing since the day she passed the bar exam. But she made mistakes. Paper trails, digital footprints, witnesses she thought she'd bought, but who were actually loyal to Charles. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was the next revelation that truly weaponized our position. Sebastian had been recording every threat, every conversation with my family and their lawyers since I'd arrived in Monaco. International law meant some recordings wouldn't be admissible in American courts, but Monaco courts would accept them, and public opinion would be devastating. "Your aunt called me yesterday," Sebastian revealed, playing a recording. Catherine's voice was venomous as she detailed exactly how she'd frame me for crimes, how she'd destroy that little bitch completely. She even admitted to the poisoning, believing she was speaking to a sympathetic Monaco official she'd bribed, not realizing it was one of Sebastian's associates. We spent the next 3 days building an airtight case. Isabella's lawyer, one of Monaco's most respected attorneys, prepared criminal complaints. Sebastian's financial team documented every fraudulent transaction. I provided the personal touch, writing a detailed timeline of my grandfather's last months supported by the hidden videos. Then, disaster nearly struck. I returned to my hotel to find my room ransacked. Someone had bribed the staff and searched everything, but they'd found nothing because Sebastian had insisted we keep all evidence in multiple secure locations. What they did leave was a message carved into the bathroom mirror. Last chance. Give up or disappear. Uncle Robert's escalation to physical threats marked a new low. Hotel security footage showed him entering the building earlier that day, and witnesses saw him arguing with staff. When I reported it to Monaco police, they took it seriously, especially with Isabella's influence behind the scenes. But I knew he wouldn't stop there. My instincts proved right. The next evening, as I dined at a small restaurant Sebastian had recommended, I noticed my water tasted strange. The room began spinning, and I barely managed to alert my security detail before collapsing. At the hospital, tests revealed a high dose of sedatives in my system, the same drug found in grandfather's system during his final months. Aunt Catherine had made a crucial error. She'd been seen at the restaurant earlier, and in her arrogance she'd used the same poison she'd used on grandfather. The police now had a pattern, a modus operandi that connected her to both attacks. Even better, the restaurant's kitchen footage showed her bribing a waiter, the same young man who quickly confessed when faced with criminal charges. While I recovered, Brother James arrived in Monaco. I expected another attack, but instead found a broken man at my bedside. "I didn't know," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I swear, Joanne, I didn't know about the poisoning. They told me you were trying to steal everything that grandfather wanted us to protect the family assets. But poisoning attempted murder. This isn't what I signed up for." His confession was genuine. I could see it in his eyes. More importantly, he was willing to testify about what he did know: the planning sessions, the forged documents he'd been asked to sign, the conversations about handling me. He'd kept recordings of his own insurance against his partners in crime, never imagining he'd need protection from his own family. "They're planning something worse," he warned. "Michelle's desperate. She knows you have evidence of her embezzlement. She's talking about making you disappear permanently, making it look like suicide. She has connections, Joanne. Dangerous ones." The stakes had escalated beyond money to survival itself. But now I had an arsenal of my own: Isabella's decades of evidence, Sebastian's recordings, James's testimony, and a poisoning attempt that had been caught on camera. The hunters had become the hunted, and it was time to strike. We filed the first wave of criminal complaints in Monaco, where Isabella's influence ensured they'd be taken seriously. Embezzlement, attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud. The charges were comprehensive and supported by overwhelming evidence. Within hours, international arrest warrants were issued. Aunt Catherine was arrested at her Monaco hotel, caught trying to flee with a suitcase full of cash she'd withdrawn from grandfather's accounts using forged signatures. The look of shock on her face as police led her away was captured by photographers we'd tipped off. By evening, her arrest was international news. But Michelle was smarter. She'd sensed the trap closing and tried to escape on a private jet. What she didn't know was that Sebastian had contacts in aviation and her flight plan had been shared with authorities. She was arrested on the tarmac, her laptop still open to offshore accounts where she'd hidden millions in stolen funds. Uncle Robert's arrest was the most dramatic. He'd holed up in a yacht threatening violence if police approached. It took a 6-hour standoff before Monaco's tactical team took him into custody. His breakdown was complete. The careful control he'd always maintained shattered as he screamed about his rights to inheritance he'd never earned. The tables hadn't just turned. They'd been completely overturned. My family, who'd spent weeks painting me as a criminal, were now the ones facing justice. The evidence Isabella and grandfather had gathered was so comprehensive that their lawyers were already discussing plea deals rather than trials. "Your grandfather planned this perfectly," Isabella said as we watched the news coverage from her villa. "He knew they'd reveal themselves if they thought they'd won. Every cruel action they took against you only added to their eventual downfall. But we weren't done yet. The criminal cases were just the beginning. Now came the civil reckoning, and with it the complete dismantling of everything they'd stolen. Grandfather's true will was about to be revealed, and with it a justice that went beyond simple inheritance. The family who'd conspired to steal millions was about to lose everything, and the granddaughter they'd thrown away like garbage was holding all the cards. The counteroffensive began at dawn with simultaneous legal filings in 3 countries. Sebastian's team, working with Isabella's lawyers and prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions, unleashed a coordinated assault that made my family's earlier attacks look amateurish. By noon, their bank accounts were frozen by court order, their assets placed under judicial seal, and their passports confiscated. The media storm was immediate and devastating. Heiress fights back, granddaughter exposes family's murder plot, read one headline. Millions in embezzlement. How one family's greed led to attempted murder, proclaimed another. The carefully edited hospital footage showing Aunt Catherine poisoning grandfather went viral within hours. Public opinion, which my family had tried so hard to manipulate against me, turned into a tsunami of outrage in my favor. From her jail cell, Michelle made one last desperate play. She contacted her network of corrupt lawyers and judges, calling in every favor she'd accumulated. Within days, a motion was filed claiming all evidence against them had been illegally obtained. She argued that grandfather had been mentally incompetent when he installed the cameras, that the recordings were inadmissible, that Isabella had no standing in American courts. The hearing was set for the following week, and I flew back to the States for the first time since fleeing with garbage bags. The courthouse was packed with media and curiosity seekers. My family out on bail, except for Aunt Catherine, who was deemed a flight risk, sat at their table looking haggard but defiant. Michelle had pulled every string to get Judge Harrison a man she'd helped elect years ago. But what she didn't know was that grandfather had anticipated this, too. Among his papers was evidence of Michelle's illegal campaign contributions to Harrison, proof that would end both their careers if revealed. When Sebastian's lawyer quietly showed this evidence to Harrison in chambers, the judge had no choice but to recuse himself. The case was reassigned to Judge Chen, known for her integrity and intolerance of corruption. Michelle's face went white as she realized her last ace had been neutralized. The trial was swift and brutal. Video after video played showing my family's crimes in undeniable detail. The poisoning, the forgery, the embezzlement, each revelation brought gasps from the gallery. When the restaurant footage of my own poisoning was shown, several jurors visibly recoiled from my family. But it was James's testimony that truly shattered their defense. My brother, granted immunity for his cooperation, laid out the entire conspiracy from the inside. He revealed how they'd met monthly to plan grandfather's downfall, how they'd discussed ways to eliminate me from inheritance, how Michelle had assured them it was all legal when they knew it wasn't. "I'm ashamed," James said, looking directly at me. "I let greed blind me to what we were doing to the only person who actually loved our grandfather." Joanne spent every day at his bedside while we plotted to steal from him. She deserved everything, and we deserved nothing. Under cross-examination, my family's stories crumbled. Aunt Catherine, forced to testify from custody, tried to claim the videos were deep fakes, but couldn't explain how grandfather's toxicology reports matched the substances seen on camera. Uncle Robert attempted to intimidate witnesses from the stand, resulting in additional contempt charges. Cousin Brad broke, completely admitting to seducing Emma specifically to spy on me. Michelle, acting as her own lawyer in a final act of hubris, made a fatal error. In trying to discredit Isabella, she accidentally admitted to knowing about grandfather's Monaco holdings, contradicting her earlier claims of ignorance. The prosecutor pounced on this admission, using it to prove she'd been embezzling from both the American and European companies. As the evidence mounted, my family turned on each other like rabid dogs. Catherine accused Robert of masterminding everything. Robert blamed Michelle for misleading them about the legal ramifications. Brad claimed he was just following orders. Michelle, cornered and desperate, finally screamed that they'd all known exactly what they were doing and had been happy to do it as long as they got paid. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Elder abuse, attempted murder, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. The convictions stacked up like dominoes. Catherine received 25 years for the poisoning charges. Michelle got 30 years for embezzlement and attempted murder, her legal career destroyed along with her freedom. Robert was sentenced to 15 years, his tough guy facade crumbling as he was led away in shackles. Brad got 5 years and would have to register as a sex offender for his manipulation of Emma. But the criminal trial was just the appetizer. The civil proceedings revealed grandfather's true will, properly executed, and witnessed years before his illness. In it, he left specific bequests to family members $1,000 each to those who'd valued money over love, with detailed explanations of why they deserved no more. The bulk of his estate, both American and European, was left to me with a note, "To the only family member who loved me for who I was not what I had." The family's lawyers tried one last desperate measure, claiming the will was invalid due to undue influence. But how could I have influenced a will written before I'd even known about the Monaco fortune? How could I have manipulated a man while his own children were poisoning him? The judge dismissed their claims with prejudice, ordering them to pay my legal fees as well. As the gavel fell finalizing the largest transfer of wealth in the state's probate history, I felt no joy, only relief. The family who'd thrown my belongings in garbage bags now faced bankruptcy from legal fees and civil judgments. The millions they'd thought they'd inherited had to be returned with interest and penalties. Their homes, cars, and assets were seized to satisfy the judgments against them. The poetic justice was complete when I purchased Uncle Robert's mansion at the foreclosure auction, planning to turn it into a shelter for elder abuse victims. Aunt Catherine's prized Mercedes became a donation to the charity I established in grandfather's name. The yacht Brad had coveted was sold to fund scholarships for nursing students who showed compassion in elder care. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Emma tried to visit me after the trials. She stood at my door, mascara running, begging for forgiveness. "I didn't know they were capable of murder," she sobbed. "Brad told me you were mentally ill, that we were helping you." I looked at the woman who'd been my best friend, who'd recorded our conversations and betrayed my deepest secrets for a man she'd known 6 months, and felt only pity. "You didn't know about the murder," I acknowledged. "But you knew you were betraying me. You chose a relationship over a friendship, money over loyalty. That's not something I can forgive." As she walked away, I realized the true cost of grandfather's final gambit. I'd gained justice and fortune, but lost a family and friend I'd thought were real. Yet in their place, I'd found truth and the strength to stand alone. The money was nice, but the revelation of who truly cared about me was priceless. Standing in grandfather's rebuilt office, I looked at his portrait and whispered, "We won." But even as I said it, I knew the real victory wasn't the money or even the justice. It was discovering that I was stronger than I ever imagined, that grandfather's faith in me hadn't been misplaced, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what really matters. 6 months after the trials ended, I stood in the garden of grandfather's estate, now legally mine but feeling like foreign territory. Maria had returned as estate manager, and together we were slowly erasing the stains my family had left behind. The roses I'd planted with grandfather bloomed again, somehow surviving the neglect and chaos. The aftermath of victory was lonelier than I'd expected. The media attention faded, the lawyers moved on to other cases, and I was left with a fortune I'd never wanted, and memories of betrayals that still woke me at night. Some mornings I'd walk through the massive house and wonder if the money was worth losing everyone I'd thought cared about me. Therapy helped, though. Finding a therapist in Monaco who understood inheritance trauma was its own challenge. Dr. Moreau, recommended by Isabella, specialized in family betrayal and complex grief. "You're mourning multiple losses," she explained during our 3rd session. "Not just your grandfather, but the family you thought you had, the friend you trusted, the life you knew. That's complicated grief, and it takes time." She was right. I grieved the aunt who'd taught me to braid my hair, even as I knew she'd tried to poison me. I mourned the brother who'd played catch with me in this very garden, though he'd thrown me out of it. The uncle who'd once carried me on his shoulders had threatened my life, but I still missed who I'd thought he was. Even Emma's betrayal ached like a phantom limb. Isabella became my anchor during those difficult months. We met weekly for tea, and she shared stories about grandfather I'd never heard. "He talked about you constantly," she said one afternoon. "How you'd volunteer at the senior center, how you'd chosen nursing to help others. He knew the others visited only when they needed money, but but you came because you loved him. Through Isabella, I learned about the grandfather who'd built hospitals in Monaco, funded orphanages, quietly helped young entrepreneurs get started. The family had known only his wealth, but grandfather had used that wealth to change lives. Now it's your turn, Isabella said gently. What will you do with his legacy? The answer came gradually. I established the Charles Morrison Foundation for Elder Protection, focusing on preventing elder abuse and supporting victims. The first major grant went to the hospital where grandfather died, funding a specialized unit to detect and prevent elder abuse. Nancy, the nurse who'd saved me from false arrest, became the unit's director. Word spread about the foundation, and soon I was receiving letters from around the world. Children who'd been disinherited for refusing to participate in elder abuse. Seniors who'd survived family exploitation. Healthcare workers who'd witnessed abuse but lacked resources to stop it. Each story reminded me that grandfather and I weren't alone in our experience. The legal reforms came next. Using grandfather's evidence and our case as a model, I worked with lawmakers to strengthen elder abuse protections. Michelle's sophisticated embezzlement schemes became textbook examples of financial exploitation. The footage of Catherine's poisoning was used to train healthcare workers in detection. From our pain came policies that would protect others. Romance wasn't on my radar until Alexandra entered my life. The French prosecutor who'd helped build our international case stayed in touch after the trials. First, it was professional consultations about the foundation, then coffee to discuss legal reforms. Somewhere between debates about jurisdiction and shared meals overlooking the Mediterranean, friendship deepened into something more. You know I come with significant baggage. I warned him over dinner one evening. Trust issues, family drama that made international headlines, and a tendency to suspect everyone's motives. He smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. And I come with an ex-wife, 2 children, and a career prosecuting criminals. We all have our complications. The question is whether we face them together or alone. We took it slow, my therapist's approval notwithstanding. Alexandra understood my need to verify everything, to look for hidden motives, even in kindness. He never pushed, never demanded trust I wasn't ready to give. When I finally introduced him to Isabella, her approval meant everything. He sees you, not your money, she declared. That's rare. James's journey toward redemption was more complex. After serving 6 months in a minimum security facility, he emerged determined to earn forgiveness. He started by working at an elder care facility, changing bedpans, and learning the humanity he'd lost to greed. His letters came monthly, never asking for anything, just updating me on his progress. 2 years later, when he asked to meet, I agreed cautiously. The man who sat across from me in a small cafe bore little resemblance to the brother who'd thrown my belongings on the lawn. I don't expect forgiveness, he said simply. I just want you to know that I think about what we did every day. I'm in therapy, attending support groups for people who've committed elder abuse. I'm trying to become someone grandfather wouldn't be ashamed of. It would take years before I could fully trust him again. But I recognized genuine remorse. He'd refused his share of inheritance even after the will was validated, asking instead that it go to the foundation. He lived, simply worked, honestly and slowly. Painfully, we began rebuilding something that might someday resemble brotherhood. The others showed no such growth. Aunt Catherine sent letters from prison, alternating between threats and manipulation. Uncle Robert blamed everyone but himself in interviews from behind bars. Brad started a podcast claiming he was the real victim, which was quickly shut down for violating his plea agreement. Michelle, disbarred and imprisoned, still insisted she'd done nothing wrong. Emma tried repeatedly to reconnect, sending messages through mutual friends, showing up at foundation events, even writing a book proposal about our friendship that publishers rejected. I maintained silence, knowing that some betrayals cut too deep for reconciliation. She'd chosen her path, and living with the consequences was her burden to bear. On the 5th anniversary of grandfather's death, I held a memorial at his gravesite. Maria came, as did Isabella, Sebastian, Nancy, and surprisingly, James. We shared stories about the grandfather each of us knew, the complicated man who'd lived multiple lives across continents, who'd loved deeply but couldn't always show it, who'd planned even his death to reveal truth and deliver justice. "You gave me more than money," I said to his headstone after the others had left. "You gave me the gift of seeing people clearly, of understanding that love isn't about words or blood, but about actions when times are hardest. You showed me that family isn't always who we're born to, but who stands by us in the darkness." That night, I found an unopened letter in Grandfather's study, one Sebastian had held back until I was ready. Inside, in Grandfather's shaky handwriting, were his final words to me. "My dearest Joanne, if you're reading this, then you've survived the storm I had to put you through. I'm sorry for the pain, but not for the lesson. You needed to see them for who they really were, and they needed to face justice for what they'd done. But don't let their darkness dim your light. Yes, you'll have trust issues. Yes, you'll question motives. That's natural and even healthy. But don't close your heart entirely. There are good people in this world, people like you who choose love over money, compassion over greed. Use what I've left you to make the world better. Love again, even if it's scary. Trust again, even if it's hard. Build the family you deserve, not the one you were born into. And remember, the best revenge against those who tried to destroy you is to live well, love deeply, and help others." The plane ticket to Monaco wasn't just about revealing their crimes or claiming your inheritance. It was about sending you on a journey to discover your own strength. You were always strong, my dear. You just needed to believe it. All my love, Grandfather. Standing in the garden where I'd once collected my life from garbage bags, I understood the full scope of his gift. The money had been the least of it. He'd given me truth, justice, and most importantly, the knowledge that I could survive anything. My family had gotten millions in fake inheritance they had to return. I'd gotten a plane ticket that changed my life. As Alexandre found me in the garden, wrapping his arms around me in the evening light, I felt the last of the anger fade. My family's betrayal had taught me to recognize genuine love when I found it. Their cruelty had shown me the importance of kindness. Their greed had taught me the value of generosity. The foundation thrived, helping thousands of elders and their families. The legal reforms passed, protecting vulnerable seniors across multiple countries. James slowly earned his place back in my life through consistent action. Isabella became the grandmother I'd never had, and I built a life filled with purpose, love, and the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal. Looking back, I wouldn't change what happened. Yes, the pain was devastating. Yes, the betrayals scarred me. But from that pain came purpose. From those scars came strength. And from losing a toxic family came the freedom to build a chosen one. My family got millions at my grandfather's funeral. I got a plane ticket to Monaco. In the end, we all got exactly what we deserved. To those watching who've faced family betrayal, who've been thrown away like garbage while others celebrated their cruelty, know this: your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. Sometimes the smallest inheritance carries the greatest treasure. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find everything that matters. What would you do if your family's betrayal became your greatest gift? If you've survived family trauma, or know someone who has, share your strength in the comments below. Like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over betrayal. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their pain. Together we can break the silence around family abuse and build the supportive communities we deserve. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to triumph. May you find the courage to face your own storms and discover the strength that's always been within you. Until next time, remember that the best revenge is a life well lived, and the greatest inheritance is the wisdom to know who truly deserves your love.